On October 24, 2025, the federal courthouse in Norfolk, Virginia, was charged with tension. The air was thick with anticipation as crowds gathered, reporters jostled for position, and security was heightened at every entrance. It was a day that would be etched into the city's memory as the eyes of the nation turned to this otherwise quiet courthouse. This was no ordinary arraignment. New York Attorney General Letitia James, famed for her high-profile legal battles against Donald Trump and her reputation as a relentless prosecutor, now stood accused herself. The irony was not lost on anyone. The prosecutor had become the prosecuted. The charges were serious: bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution. The indictment, thick with legal jargon and allegations, painted a picture of alleged deception at the highest levels. For James, the stakes could not have been higher. As the indictment was read aloud in the hushed courtroom, James responded with unwavering resolve: not guilty. Her voice was steady, her demeanor unflinching, as she faced the judge and the assembled press. Those two words, not guilty, set the stage for a legal and political showdown that would grip the nation. The courthouse, ringed by media vans and police barriers, became the epicenter of a storm that was as much about politics as it was about law. Once a formidable prosecutor, now a defendant, James faced the full force of the federal government. The reversal of roles was dramatic, and the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Her release on her own recognizance was routine, a standard procedure for someone of her stature. But nothing else about the day felt ordinary. Every step she took was watched, every gesture analyzed. Outside, supporters rallied, their chants echoing the high stakes inside. Some waved signs of solidarity, while others voiced their outrage at what they saw as a politically motivated prosecution. This was more than a legal case. It was a political spectacle, a clash of law and power in a nation already deeply divided. The courthouse steps became a stage for competing narratives, each side convinced of its own truth. James's plea was more than a legal formality. It was a declaration that she would fight every aspect of the government's case, refusing to back down in the face of overwhelming scrutiny. Her legal team, seasoned and unyielding, saw the indictment as political retribution, not justice. They vowed to challenge every allegation, framing the case as an attack on her record and her principles. The Department of Justice, under new leadership, was flexing its authority, determined to show that no one, not even a state attorney general, was above the law. Their message was clear: accountability would be enforced, regardless of politics. James, in turn, asserted her innocence and resolve. She spoke to the press with conviction, insisting that the truth would prevail, and that she would not be intimidated by the weight of the federal government. The justice system, idealized as impartial, was now the battleground for partisan conflict. The courthouse, draped in symbols of justice, was at the heart of a struggle over the very meaning of fairness and accountability. The case was inseparable from her high-profile victory against Trump and its fallout. For many, this prosecution was payback. For others, it was proof that justice was blind. Her not guilty plea marked the beginning of a conflict that would test not only the judiciary's independence, but also the resilience and reputation of a prominent legal figure under fire. The stage was set for a trial where politics and law would collide, and the outcome would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls, shaping the nation's understanding of justice for years to come. The case centered on a modest Norfolk house, a simple, unassuming home nestled in a quiet Virginia neighborhood. At first glance, it looked like any other house on the block, but it would soon become the focus of a high-profile legal battle. In 2020, James purchased the property for $137,000, a price typical for the area, but the transaction would draw national attention. She secured a $109,600 mortgage, listing the house as a second home on her loan application. This detail would later become a central point of contention in the case. Prosecutors alleged this was a deliberate misrepresentation, claiming James knowingly declared the house as a second residence to qualify for a lower interest rate. By doing so, she saved nearly $19,000 over the life of the 30-year loan, a significant sum for most homeowners. The government argued that James, who served as New York's top law enforcement officer, should have known better. They insisted she used her knowledge and position to deceive the bank for personal financial gain, rather than out of ignorance or confusion. According to prosecutors, her real intention was never to live in the house, but to rent it out for extra income. They pointed to evidence suggesting the property was always meant to be an investment, not a personal retreat. The fact that a family member moved in, they argued, was proof that the house functioned as a rental, not a second home, as claimed on the mortgage documents. The entire case hinged on a single question. Was this a calculated act of mortgage fraud, or simply a misunderstanding of complex lending rules? The answer would have far-reaching consequences. The prosecution sought to strip away James's political identity, portraying her not as a public servant, but as an ordinary borrower who lied to a bank for a better deal. They wanted the jury to see her actions as deliberate and self-serving. While the financial stakes in this case were relatively small, the implications for public trust, legal accountability, and the integrity of those in power were enormous. The indictment of Letitia James can't be separated from its political context. James, a Democrat, had led a major civil fraud case against Trump, drawing his public ire and calls for her prosecution. For Trump's supporters, the indictment was vindication. For hers, a nightmare. James's team called the charges political retribution, not a good-faith legal effort. The investigation began soon after her victory over Trump, fueling claims of payback. The case became a test of whether prosecutors who challenge the powerful can expect retaliation when the political winds shift. The prosecution's origins fueled controversy, casting a long shadow over the entire case from the very beginning. Even before the first motions were filed, whispers of political influence and backroom deals began to circulate among legal insiders and the public alike. Lindsay Halligan, a former Trump White House aide with little experience in high-profile criminal cases, was appointed acting U.S. attorney in September 2025. Her sudden rise to the top post raised eyebrows across the legal community, with many questioning whether her political connections played a role in her selection. Her appointment followed the pressured resignation of her predecessor, who reportedly resisted indicting James, citing insufficient evidence and concerns about the integrity of the process. The abrupt leadership change sent shockwaves through the office. Halligan's arrival and the subsequent indictment only deepened suspicions of politicization. Critics argued that the timing and circumstances suggested the case was being driven by outside agendas rather than the pursuit of justice. In the weeks that followed, career prosecutors, some with decades of experience, either resigned in protest or were abruptly terminated. Many objected to the case's merits, warning that the office's reputation for fairness was at risk. The office, once staffed by experienced, nonpartisan lawyers, was now in turmoil. Morale plummeted, and the sense of mission that had defined the Eastern District for years seemed to evaporate almost overnight. In a highly unusual move, Halligan presented the case to the grand jury herself, an act almost unheard of for such a complex and politically sensitive prosecution. This decision raised eyebrows among legal experts and former prosecutors. This break from standard practice raised questions about the indictment's legitimacy and whether proper procedures were being followed behind closed doors. The defense seized on these irregularities, arguing the case was driven by politics, not justice. They claimed the prosecution was more interested in headlines than in the truth. As the trial approached, the story of the prosecutor's office became as central as the mortgage itself, dominating headlines and fueling public debate. The internal dissent and leadership shakeup painted a picture of an office in disarray, struggling to maintain its credibility in the face of mounting scrutiny. The defense would use this chaos to challenge the prosecution's credibility at every turn, arguing that the case was tainted from the start. The controversy over the office's actions loomed over every step of the case, ensuring that the question of justice would remain unresolved long after the verdict was delivered. Letitia James's legal team, led by Abby Lowell, launched an aggressive defense. Their strategy attacked the prosecution's legitimacy before trial. First, they argued James was targeted for her legal battles against Trump, a case of vindictive, selective prosecution. Second, they challenged Halligan's appointment, claiming she lacked authority to secure the indictment. If the judge agreed, the case could be dismissed on procedural grounds. A joint hearing with former FBI Director James Comey, facing similar charges, was set for November 13, 2025. The outcome could determine the entire trajectory of this historic case. Inside the Department of Justice, doubts simmered. Many career prosecutors reportedly objected to charging James, citing weak evidence of criminal intent. The facts of the mortgage were clear, but intent was murky. Federal guidelines on second homes versus investment properties are ambiguous. James's use of the house, allowing relatives to live there rent-free, didn't fit a typical fraud scheme. The small financial benefit seemed a flimsy basis for a felony indictment. Internal dissent would become a key part of the defense's argument that this was a political vendetta, not a pursuit of justice. With James's plea entered, the legal battle moved to a series of crucial hearings. U.S. District Judge Jamar Walker, a Biden appointee, would oversee the case. The first major hearing, on November 13th, would address motions to dismiss from both James and Comey. If granted, the indictments could be thrown out. If denied, a trial loomed. Further hearings on evidence and witness scope were set for December. If the case survived, trial was scheduled for January 26, 2026. The prospect of a sitting New York Attorney General on trial promised a political and media firestorm. The timeline ensured the case would dominate headlines for months. Outside the courthouse, Letitia James struck a defiant tone. She condemned the case as political revenge, vowing not to be intimidated. Her supporters rallied, while prosecutors insisted no one is above the law. The government framed the case as routine justice, but the political context was inescapable. For Trump and his allies, the indictment was vindication and a political weapon. For James, the stakes were existential, her career and reputation on the line. A conviction would end her public service. An acquittal or dismissal would be a major victory and a blow to the DOJ. The outcome would shape not just James's future, but the broader battle over the politicization of American justice. The nation watched, knowing the stakes extended far beyond one courtroom. The trial's impact would echo through American politics for years to come.